Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Here in the real world, by any objective measure, the federal response to the coronavirus pandemic has been disastrously flawed, marred by mistakes and delays that have handicapped our efforts to mitigate the spread of the virus. The U.S. has the most confirmed cases in the world, one of the sharpest rates of growth, and multiple outbreaks in different parts of the country. There is no question that our federal government has done a worse job in containing this than many other countries. But in the alternate universe of the Trump show, everything is going great. President Trump is the man in control. There's a reason the president keeps appearing at the coronavirus briefings that are supposed to be about fact-based updates. He uses them as propaganda sessions, regularly spewing misinformation and lies when he is at the podium. They have morphed into something akin to Trump rallies without the crowds. The briefings are where he casts his failures in the most positive light. Yesterday, the man who initially dismissed the coronavirus threat, remember, we all heard it time and time again, said that if 100,000 Americans die from the virus, then he and his team have done a, quote, very good job. He tries to rally his base by berating journalists. The White House even appears to control the volume of the microphones of reporters asking questions, which is an innovation, by the way. This has not happened before, but they can use it to just cut off a reporter from asking any follow-ups. And of course, the president makes sure to call on propagandists to ask him the questions he wants to hear, sometimes just twice in the same briefing. And as dead bodies are being loaded into morgue trucks in New York City because the city is running out of space and hospitals, the president, in a new low even for him, was bragging this weekend and at the press conference about what good TV ratings he's getting. I'm joined now by Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who's been sounding the alarm about the sluggish federal action to help hospitals and first responders. He tweeted today that the new Republican argument is that you criticize President Trump's coronavirus response, you are disloyal Chinese communist propagandists. Senator, I think that regular information in times of crisis from the government on sort of the science and facts and policy are essential, but I personally can't help but feel these daily sessions are bad for the country. Even dangerous from a public health perspective. What is your view?
Well, the president really sees, his only responsibility as one of managing a public relations campaign about trying to set expectations so ridiculously low that he can't help but step over the bar. I mean, listen, there has been no strategy from this administration, no comprehensive response to coronavirus from the very beginning. He has not taken control of the manufacturing of protective equipment. He has not federalized the supply chain. He has issued absolutely no national guidance on social distancing or business and school closures. He has left all of this to the mayors and the governors, and instead he just runs a public relations operation that, as you mentioned, unfortunately regularly dispenses very bad advice to Americans. And so, I think it's pretty harrowing for all of us to watch this lack of leadership from the White House and to, frankly, watch a lot of the media go along with it because his press conferences, as always, are still entertaining. in part because he is combative, in part because he does lie, and you can catch him in those lies and hold him accountable. But that doesn't make for an effective public health response.
Yeah, that's why he's bragging about the ratings. It's obviously above my pay grade. I don't make the call that we take them or not, but it seems crazy to me that everyone's still taking them when you got the My Pillow guy getting up there talking about reading the Bible. On February 5th, you were in a briefing and on preparedness, on precisely this question. You tweeted this. On February 5th, I sat in a meeting with top administration officials as senators pressed them to request emergency funding to hire staff and stockpile supplies for the coming crisis. They said they had it covered, didn't need any additional funding. What a fatal screw-up. What was that briefing like on February 5th?
So, this is an interesting moment for a briefing because the impeachment trial has not yet wrapped up, but the administration brings their top folks before the Senate for a private briefing to explain what they're doing about the coronavirus, which at that point had only had a couple cases on the West Coast. And it was just an absolutely chilling briefing. And I walked out and immediately made a statement that it was shocking to me that the administration was refusing our offers of early funding. A number of us in that meeting said to the administration, you need to request emergency dollars from us now. If what you're saying is true, then we cannot respond to this eventual crisis without starting to buy supplies now, without starting to staff up in hospitals and local public health districts now. And what the administration said on February 5th was, no, we got it. We don't need any additional money. We can handle this with all the resources we have. What we know is that was a fatal mistake, and their unwillingness to come to Congress was both a sign of the fact that they just didn't understand how awful this was going to be, but also just a signal of their fundamental ideological belief that the federal government doesn't have a responsibility at a time of crisis like this. I mean, the White House is just full of people that don't think it's their job, and that was telegraphed pretty clearly in that meeting in early February.
There's concern now about, when you look at this federalized response, there's also concern now that you're getting favoritism. And the president basically said that he admitted this. He said he tells Mike Pence not to call certain governors he doesn't like. Gretchen Whitmer's on the record saying that shipments of needed supplies were canceled. She believes that's at the behest, essentially, of the White House. There's ProPublica reporting that Florida, on the other hand, has gotten everything they've asked for. There's been a wide disparity in terms of how the federal government's responded to some states and others. And I should note here, for fairness, Andrew Cuomo has been very grateful for some of the federal aid that has been directed to New York after lots of back and forth. Do you have those concerns right now that there's essentially an uneven response federally that depends on the politics of the governor at play and the degree to which the president's ego is massaged?
Well, it sort of feels like Ukraine all over again. The president is, now, instead of using foreign aid, using emergency relief in order to try to get people to do his political bidding. I mean, the message seems pretty clear. If you criticize the president, then you are going to get attacked and you are potentially going to have critical medical supplies withheld. And if you get the president's back politically, then we'll send you what you need. Listen, I, Chris, have called on Congress and the administration to federalize the manufacture and distribution of critical medical supplies, because I just don't see any way that the private sector gets the stuff to the places that need it the most. Admittedly, though, I'm very nervous about my own proposal, because that puts an enormous amount of power, additional power, in the hands of a capricious and vindictive White House. And so we're caught between, two unacceptable realities. One in which the private sector is misappropriating resources and not producing enough, and a second in which the president has authorities that any chief executive should possess, but is going to use them in a way that hurts the nations and benefits himself politically.
It is Tuesday, the 31st of March of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small dash, a mere scant pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always does. Try it. Well, are we going to keep broadcasting these pressers that Trump is giving since he can't have his rallies? It follows a format. It's like a stage show. He's the rainmaker come to town. It follows a format. He comes up and, gives a few platitudes or complaints. Then an expert like Fauci or Birx comes up and speaks for a little bit. And then he comes back, and at some point, there's a Q&A from the press. And he attacks the press. Why aren't you treating me nicer? Why aren't you positive? If you would just think positive, this negative virus would go away. When you question me, you are on the side of the virus. And then he leaves. Leaves it up for Mike Pence to go out there with his little eyebrow pinch. Oh, God, I hate that little furrowed brow of his as he's lying through his teeth. The same furrowed brow that he gave when he was a high-paid shill for big tobacco. And claiming that, nicotine is not addictive. You have that little furrowed brow. Uh-huh. So it follows a format. It's a stage show. It's the Rainmaker come to town. Okay, well, we got that going for us, which isn't so very nice when you think about it. Speaking of nice, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, I think, leaving the Bernie camp, or at least she can add up the numbers. And why wouldn't she? So, of course, she's being pilloried. And, that's what happens. I would like to think that we're going to try to get Trump out of office. So whenever I hear these stories about lascivious activities, I actually thought they were talking about Trump. But apparently it's about Joe. Because Joe's all touchy-feely, and we got a Juanita Broderick, new Juanita Broderick, changing stories. But, Fox believes it, so therefore it must be true. Now, I don't know the validity of it. I would think this would have been a bigger issue by now. I mean, come on. His plagiarism, way back in the day, supposed plagiarism. I do remember that there was a medical reason. I think that he was suffering from some sort of brain trauma, injury, maybe even a small tumor. I can't remember what it was, but it had something to do with a brain injury. And that was, I guess he didn't annotate properly, and then that was called plagiarism. I think that's how it worked. But, hey, we hear about that, but we don't hear about the new Juanita Broderick until, just now. And I guess you can file that away as like, well, women are given short shrift in these sorts of situations. But I would think in these sorts of situations it would have been hailed a lot louder, especially when he was the running mate of Barack Obama. I mean, come on. They hated the black guy. They needed any kind of excuse to take down the black guy. You don't think they're going to take his trusty sidekick and use his past and allegations against him to bring down the black guy? Come on. So I'm just saying, I take it with a grain of salt. So when I hear these lascivious behaviors and I'm thinking it's about Donald Trump and it's not, and I'm thinking, wait a second. November's just around the corner. I know March seemed like particularly long with the pandemic, and it seems like it's going to be a long time till November comes up, but it's going to come up a lot faster than we expect. And we have to be ready, don't we? Okay, I'm not, the jury is still out. I'm not saying, Bernie or Joe. I'm just saying, jury's still out. Numbers are adding up, though. One might say that Joe's too timid, but have you seen his ads? Those are fighting ads. Trump's not going to like it. That's why he's taking it out on Yamiche Alcindor. If there's not a black woman around that he can blame for everything, like Yamiche, well, then try that woman from Michigan. That woman from Michigan. He's such a mobster. Yeah, he's a cutie pie, isn't he? Hey, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was Senator Chris Murphy explaining that, while holding back pandemic relief so that governors will do him a favor, though. Trump is pulling a Ukraine all over again. All over. Except for foreign aid, he's using pandemic relief as the leverage. The quid pro quo. Then on the rest of the menu, the FBI warned the public of the potential for Zoom bombing after 2 schools reported their video conferencing classes were hijacked. And this comes on the heels after I just set up my smartphone for Zoom so that my elderly mom could have a video conference with her doctor. Well, hopefully, since it's private, it won't be an issue. Let's hope. Federal judges stopped Texas, Ohio, and Alabama from curbing abortions during the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah, they're using everything as disaster capitalism, the shock doctrine, right in front of our eyes. And the FBI is looking into Senate Intel Chair Richard Burr dumping $1.7 million in stocks in the days before the pandemic wreaked havoc on the economy. I'm sure Bill Barr will step in and we won't hear anything about this investigation ever again. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Britain will spend the equivalent of $93 million U.S. to get their stranded citizens home on charter flights. Well, at least they care about their citizens. And thieves stole a Van Gogh from a Dutch museum closed by the pandemic. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page, and do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Your recurring contribution, say, how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink, even in these perilous times, if you could afford that? Especially in these perilous times, your generosity allows us to pay our bills, and we still have to get more machinery and software to keep this little powerhouse of resistance resisting, as we have for the last 9 years. You know, there's even been SARS and swine flu and MERS and all of that pandemic going on during the Obama administration. It never stopped us. And we're not going to let this one stop us either. And we're able to do it because of your generosity, and thank you for that, really. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can by simply going to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank him for doing that as well. I, of course, take care of @JusticePutnam. Follow me there because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get it linked up on social media like, Twitter and Tumblr and Instagram and all the others except for Facebook. Zuckerberg, why are you censoring the free press? Stop doing this to Netroots Radio. Please. What you do to me, you're doing to the radio station. Please. Oh, my God. We'll get into that again at another date, because you probably already know. And I think I've got now 15 days left, about 2 weeks. And then we'll see if I get another serial suspension like the other 2 happened. We'll see. Okay. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, go to @CookbookWest. And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, Let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it comes out of Newsweek by Isla Slisko. The FBI has warned the public of the potential for Zoom bombing after 2 schools saw their online classes get hijacked on the popular video conferencing app Zoom. Zoom has seen a massive increase in users since the COVID-19 pandemic has forced a large number of people to stay home and turn to video meetings for work, school, or social interactions. Zoom bombing, the practice of unwanted guests intruding on video meetings with malicious purposes, is also said to have significantly increased during the pandemic. You know, we use Skype and have since the very beginning. Maybe that's getting to be an old platform and an old app. Maybe. But we don't have those problems on Skype. I know that there's other issues in terms of Skype, you know, who their owners are and whatnot. But, we looked at some other teleconferencing, video conferencing apps. And Skype always worked better for us in terms of privacy, immediacy, availability, and other people being able to do it. Looks like Zoom. Wow, you're just opening it up and people can just drop in? Wow. The FBI's Boston field office issued a press release saying that the agency has received multiple reports of conferences being disrupted by pornographic and or hate images and threatening language. As individuals continue to transition to online lessons and meetings, the FBI recommends exercising due diligence and caution in your cybersecurity efforts, the press release says. The agency said 2 different online classrooms were targeted in the recent incidents. A high school class was interrupted by an unidentified person who yelled a profanity and then shouted the teacher's home address in the middle of the instruction. Oh, one of those high school pranks. But still, the danger implied is very dangerous. A second class was said to have been targeted by another unidentified individual who appeared on video while displaying their swastika tattoos. Zoom has also recently been linked to a number of suspicious websites that are said to use the company's name in an attempt to trick people into clicking potentially dangerous links. Steps that the FBI recommends to avoid Zoom bombing include keeping video conferences private rather than public, along with refraining from openly posting links to the conferences on social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook. The FBI's warnings come more than a week after Zoom published a blog post that serves as a guide on avoiding any unwelcome intrusions. Tips shared by the company include the app screen's sharing feature to only host before becoming a session, locking meetings so that no new participants can join. Muting participants and disabling file transfer are also suggested as ways to block a malicious person from hijacking or disrupting meetings. Although taking the precautions recommended by Zoom and the FBI are likely to stop a majority of unwanted incidences, video conferencing over the internet remains vulnerable to other forms of attack. Conferences could be taken over entirely if the host's passwords were hacked, for instance. Another vulnerability uncovered in 2019 could have allowed hackers to take control of the webcam of users and then spy on them even when the app was not in use, although the company is said to have fixed the issue since then. Now, of course, Newsweek reached out to Zoom for comment, but as usual did not receive a response in time for publication. song of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Federal judges blocked officials in Texas, Ohio, and Alabama from banning most abortions in those states as part of their orders to postpone surgeries and other procedures deemed not medically necessary during the coronavirus crisis. The rulings came in a series of legal actions aimed at blocking steps by various Republican-led states cracking down on abortion during the pandemic. The first of the decisions involved Texas Attorney General Ken Lazy Eye Paxton's announcement last week that abortion providers were covered by a state order that required postponement of non-urgent medical procedures to preserve hospital beds and equipment during the pandemic. U.S. District Judge Lee Yackel in Austin ruled that Paxton's action prevents Texas women from exercising what the Supreme Court has declared is their fundamental constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy before a fetus is viable. The Texas lawsuit was filed last Wednesday after clinics said they were forced to cancel hundreds of appointments for abortions across the state. Abortion is essential health care, and it's a time-sensitive service, especially during a public health crisis, Amy Hagstrom-Miller, president of Whole Woman's Health, said. And there's one of the three clinics in Texas and a plaintiff in the case. To the politicians who used this global pandemic to push their anti-abortion agenda, shame on you, she said. Abortion providers in Ohio, Iowa, Alabama, and Oklahoma filed similar litigation on Monday yesterday to block state officials from using coronavirus-related orders to limit abortion availability. Judges in Ohio and Alabama issued orders later in the day blocking the states from enforcing the coronavirus-related restrictions against abortion providers. Courts were working on an urgent basis as clinics warned that some patients were reaching the legal time limit to get the procedure. Gee, I wonder if Paxton had that in mind. Abortion providers have said the restrictions violate the right to abortion under the U.S. Constitution as recognized by the Supreme Court in its 1973 Roe v. Wade decision. Yeah, well, they never accepted it, even when they got passed. Paxton said on March 23rd the state order meant that any abortion that is not medically necessary to preserve the life or health of the mother must cease. Abortion rights advocates have criticized the state actions as political opportunism during the pandemic. It's not surprising that the states are now using the COVID crisis to stop people from getting abortion care, are the very same states that have a history of passing laws to ban abortion or using sham rationales to shut down clinics, ACLU attorney Jennifer Davlin said. In Ohio, the abortion clinics told U.S. District Judge Michael Barrett in Cincinnati that they feared being immediately shut down and prosecuted if they did not stop providing surgical abortions. Some of these patients will be forced to carry pregnancies to term against their will and at risk to their health amidst a health system overburdened by responding to COVID-19, the clinics said in their legal filing. editor of the Associated Press, brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The FBI has reached out, I love that, reached out, to Senator Richard Burr about his sale of stocks before coronavirus pandemic caused markets to plummet, a person familiar with the matter said on Monday. Do you ever notice how Trump always cites an uncited source? Whenever he talks about, nurses are stealing masks out the back door. A friend that I know who's like dealing in masks said that, so it must be true. It's like John Barron saying it. Come on. He always whines about the press using and citing unnamed sources because his unnamed sources are him. The outreach suggests federal law enforcement officials may be looking to determine whether the North Carolina Republican exploited advance information when he dumped as much as $1.7 million in stocks in the days before the coronavirus wreaked havoc on the economy. I should say it's not the coronavirus, because there's many different kinds of coronavirus. You could call it the coronavirus pandemic. Just a little style manual correction there. Burr has denied wrongdoing, but has also requested an ethics review of the stock sales because he's going to say, of course I'm going to use insider information. It's totally legal. We passed a law that allows it if you're a Republican. The Department of Justice's action, first reported by CNN, was confirmed by a person familiar with the matter who was not authorized to discuss it and spoke on condition of anonymity. And the Justice Department declined to comment because they always do. In a statement, Alice Fisher, an attorney for Burr, said that the law is clear that any American, including a senator, may participate in the stock market based on public information. So what Burr is going to say, that the secret inside advance information he got was during a briefing that he will now say is a public document and meeting. Even though Trump has made most, if not all, of the coronavirus research, etc., top secret. But Burr is counting on this briefing being a public matter. Just wait. Senate records show that Burr and his wife sold between $600 and $1.7 million in more than 30 transactions in January and mid-February, just before the market began to nosedive, and government health officials began to sound alarms about the virus. And several of the stocks were in companies that own hotels. Fancy that. All right, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Suzanne Bard. 500 million years ago, there existed a worm-like creature the size of a grain of rice. And a new study finds that this animal may have been the first to crawl around the seafloor, gobble up organic matter at one end, and poop it out the other end. The creature, dubbed Icaria wariutia, was probably one of our oldest relatives.
Icaria is maybe the oldest bilaterian animal that we find in the fossil record. So this is twice as old or more than things like dinosaurs.
University of California, Riverside paleontologist Scott Evans. He says animals like sponges are even more ancient, but they lack the bilateral symmetry that characterizes most animals today.
So a front and a back and a symmetrical left and right side. And bilaterians also have an opening for food to go in, an opening for waste to go out, and a gut connecting them, basically a tube. And really most animals, everything from insects to mammals to us, those are all bilaterians that are around today.
Evans and his colleagues discovered the humble creatures in fossil layers from the Ediacara Hills of South Australia. They used 3D laser scanners from NASA to make high-resolution images of Icaria and the surfaces they lived on. The scans confirmed the animals' bilateral body morphology and revealed the shape of the burrows they left from scavenging the seafloor.
It probably had a body that was divided into what we refer to as modules or units or segments. And because of the way it moved through the sediment, we think it had muscles and probably moved similar to how an earthworm moves by sort of extending and contracting its body using those muscle groups.
Later animals built off of Icaria's basic body morphology, which featured a small front end and a larger rear end.
It doesn't have a head or a tail, but it's starting that type of body organization by which things can build a head and a tail.
What's more, Icaria had the ability to sense the environment around it.
And sense where food was and where oxygen was, which is also a critical evolutionary step in these early animals.
The study is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It might not seem like we share that much with a 555-million-year-old fossil, but looks can be deceiving. There's probably a little bit of Icaria in all of us. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Suzanne Bard.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, outlawed slavery or involuntary servitude throughout the United States and its territories, thereby finishing the work begun by President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1862-63. The Emancipation Proclamation abolished slavery in the states that were members of the Confederacy, but not elsewhere. The 13th Amendment said nothing about citizenship and equal civil rights for the former slaves, especially their right to vote. These matters were later taken up by the 14th Amendment in 1868 and the 15th Amendment in 1870. The 14th Amendment granted full citizenship to African Americans. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote to men regardless of their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That's all for today's podcast. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1883. That was the day that cowboys went out on strike. The cowboys worked in the Texas Panhandle. Increasingly, the ranch land in the region was coming under the control of large corporate ownership. Cowboys saw their way of life changing. Work as a cowboy had always been hard. They often slept under the stars or in a tent. They worked long hours at tough physical jobs. At the end of a long day, all they had to look forward to was a simple meal of camp food. But it had been the practice that cowboys could retrieve part of their pay in newly birthed calves. Some cowboys were also allowed to round up unbranded cattle. In these ways, they could create small herds for themselves and get a stake at independence. But the new corporate owners clamped down on this practice. They also placed restrictions against cowboys gambling, carrying weapons, and drinking. Seasoned cowboys from 3 ranches gathered to plan a response to the changes. They penned a letter and sent copies to 5 large ranches. It read, in part, "We, the undersigned cowboys of the Canadian River, do by these presents agree to bind ourselves into the following obligations. First, that we will not work for less than $50 per month." 24 cowboys signed the letter, but the ranchers were able to hire scab labor. The strike ended in defeat. change had come to the Panhandle, and not in a good way.
I think I'd rather ride the rain.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
The U.S. death toll in the COVID-19 pandemic surpassed 3,000 on Monday, with more than 160,000 confirmed infections. New York has more than a third of the country's cases, with 67,000 and over 1,300 deaths. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo put out the call for help.
As governor of New York, I am asking healthcare professionals across the country, if you don't have a healthcare crisis in your community, please come help us in New York now. We need relief. We need relief for nurses who are working 12-hour shifts, one after the other. We need relief for doctors. We need relief for attendants. So if you're not busy, come help us, please. And we will return the favor.
In New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles, leaders are establishing field clinics. Navy hospital ships have arrived in New York and Los Angeles to relieve overwhelmed healthcare facilities by treating non-coronavirus patients. In Illinois, officials plan to convert Chicago's McCormick Place Convention Center, the largest in North America, into a facility with room for up to 3,000 coronavirus patients. So yes, the U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort has docked in New York City as the U.S. faces what could be its most difficult month in the pandemic. Experts worry that when the outbreak reaches its predicted peak in mid-April, more than 2,000 people could die each day. About 82,000 people could die in all in August, even with social distancing measures, according to one model cited by the White House. But there may be some bright spots in the dark days ahead. Hospitals in Northern California are cautiously hopeful that they may be seeing the first benefits of shelter-at-home precautions in the form of slightly less crushing surges of patients. Guess we'll take what we can get. House Democrats are eyeing an ambitious fourth coronavirus response package that they hope will include more direct payments to individuals, more money for state and local governments, and funding for infrastructure. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said if such measures aren't covered, the economic situation could get even more dangerous for Americans, even with the recently passed $2.2 trillion relief bill. For the second day in a row, on Monday at his daily reality TV time, Donald Trump pushed groundless speculation that healthcare workers are stealing or squandering protective masks during the pandemic. A reporter began to ask him in the Monday press briefing about remarks he made Sunday that masks may be going out the back door. Trump cut off the reporter, saying, "A tremendous power in the business." Allegedly, a supplier of masks had backed up his notion. As you'd expect, a growing number of journalists are calling on the various networks to stop carrying these so-called briefings live. Trump is using them to quench his need for the spotlight and adoration missing with the absence of his rallies to feed his ego. And they're filled with lies, misinformation, and a continuing assault on the media. Enough is enough already. From the creeping fascism files, pay attention. Leaders of countries around the world have begun invoking emergency powers as they fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Israel's government has shut down courts and launched intrusive surveillance of citizens. Bolivia has pushed back elections, and Hungarian lawmakers have approved an emergency law giving the country's populist Prime Minister Viktor Orban the authority to rule as he sees fit, effectively suspending democracy in a European Union member nation. In the bad movie on which our reality appears to be based these days, this story is the very obvious foreshadowing. Pay attention. Case in point, officials in Texas, Ohio, and Alabama hastily passed legislation banning abortions that they say are not medically necessary, claiming they had to be suspended to preserve medical supplies needed to address the coronavirus.
while federal judges on Monday sided with the clinics and temporarily blocked the abortion bans and granted temporary restraining orders blocking the policies pending court challenges. Iowa, Mississippi, and Oklahoma are among other states that have imposed similar restrictions to the procedure as the virus spreads. Oh, and Idaho is in on the action, too, where Republican Governor Brad Little signed into law 2 bills that limit the rights of transgender people, prompting outcry from LGBTQ and human rights advocates. One bill, the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, bans transgender girls from playing on girls' and women's sports teams. The bill makes Idaho the first state to pass legislation against transgender students, this according to the ACLU. The second bill prohibits transgender people from changing their gender on Idaho birth certificates. A federal court struck down a similar bill in 2018. And it's March 31st, Equal Pay Day in America. Yep, we're 3 months into 2020, yet this is how long American women must work into the year to earn the same salary as men did in 2019. Yay us. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I cannot do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com. While you're there, please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Overnight lows will be in, tonight, they're saying in the mid-30s. I better get my lettuce that I got back into the greenhouse because I haven't planted them properly yet. Now have I? We did have an overnight low last night in around 42, so it wasn't so bad. Copious amounts of water is falling from the sky. Currently, as I speak, we're expecting maybe about a quarter inch today. And lessening tonight. Showers this morning becoming less numerous during the afternoon hours. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at about 5 to 10 miles per hour in about an hour or so. Considerable clouds this evening. Some decrease in clouds late. Lows in the mid-30s. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then tomorrow we're looking at maybe a bit of a drying out. With some rain later on in the evening. Intervals of clouds and sunshine. High in the low 50s tomorrow with winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Pollen is rated at none. I wonder why. The air quality index is good in the region at 34 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is in the moderate range at 5. Barometric pressure regionally is holding steady at 30.08 inches. Visibility is down to 3 miles. And relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. I should give an update on the regional Jackson County coronavirus infections have gone from 8 on the weekend to 20 yesterday. And I have not gotten new totals for today, though we are expecting to maybe have 40 total infections by the end of the afternoon today. London is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy with coronavirus. Paris is 55 degrees and sunny with coronavirus. Rome is 59 degrees, partly cloudy with lots of coronavirus. Kyiv is 39 and fair. We don't know how much coronavirus because Vlad runs that show right now, unfortunately. Kabul is 42 and cloudy with coronavirus. Hong Kong is 66 degrees, cloudy with coronavirus holding steady. Tokyo is 50 degrees and cloudy with more coronavirus. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees, partly cloudy, though they have a lockdown on foreigners coming into the country, but they have lots of coronavirus. San Francisco, California is 51 and cloudy with a statewide lockdown with coronavirus. And New York is 42 degrees cloudy with coronavirus, but no nurses are stealing masks because that's what Trump would do. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. The ever-present anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Britain will spend $93 million U.S. to get stranded citizens home on charter flights, Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said, adding that airlines would be flexible in offering commercial routes where possible. Countries have closed airspace and restricted travel to contain the spread of coronavirus, and EasyJet earlier on yesterday, grounded its entire fleet. Tens of thousands of stranded British travelers will be flown home under the new arrangement, which sees airlines including British Airways, EasyJet, Virgin, Jet2, and Titan, offering alternative bookings where routes are cancelled. In a letter to the airlines, Raab and Transport Minister Grant Shapps said the repatriation efforts would prioritize the vulnerable, but said the special flights were not intended for symptomatic passengers who should self-isolate.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Hilda Vervej of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Thieves stole a painting by Dutch master Vincent van Gogh from the Netherlands Singer-Laren Museum, which is currently closed to the public because of coronavirus. The painting, Lentusian, or Spring Garden, which dates back to 1884 and depicts the garden of the rectory of Nuenen, had been on loan from the Groninger Museum. Van Gogh, who struggled with mental illness throughout his life, was staying with his parents when he painted Spring Garden. His father worked as a minister in Nuenen. In a statement, police said the thieves had entered the museum by breaking its glass doors at around 3:15 a.m. local. The culprits were gone by the time police responded to the alarm, the statement said. Investigators are searching for security footage and witnesses and are examining forensic evidence. Broken glass. Dutch museums have been closed because of the outbreak since March 12th. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. In fact, we're going to meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Gogh. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.